Detective, I want to ask you about the photos that have been admitted as Exhibit 23. You were asked a question about this particular photo that's page 8 of Exhibit 23, is that correct?
Yes.
Now this set of photos, help remind us, where do these photos come from?
This was evidence photos from a search warrant executed on January 17th
Okay, and
of 2020.
at the time that this search warrant was executed, was DPD homicide involved in this investigation yet?
No.
And at the time that this search warrant was executed, had the defendant come forward with any statement to the police about, in fact, being with Zion Foster in this particular home?
No.
And in terms of the overall investigation, if you could have recovered anything of value, or anything of value could have been recovered from this particular sort of search warrant, what would have been the most valuable thing you could hope to recover?
The most valuable piece of evidence would have been her body.
Okay. And I also want to show you part of what's been admitted as Exhibit 46, and specifically the video from January 6th of 2022. This time frame that's shown here, with the timestamp being 2:56 p.m. on the system time, what is the relevance of this general time surrounding that point in time?
That the defendant's phone also put him at that location at this time.
Okay, and to be clear, this particular vehicle, do you know whose vehicle that is?
No.
Okay, and can you say with any certainty whether the defendant was in that vehicle?
No.
Okay. There were some questions about the requests for certain items to be submitted to the Michigan State Police Laboratory for analysis, correct?
Yes.
Can I ask, how long has this case been pending?
This case, since the defendant's arrest in June of 2023.
Okay, and during the time that this case has been pending, are you aware of, or did you receive any requests by the defense to get any items analyzed at the laboratory?
No.
Okay. There were some questions about Vertez Gonzalez's testimony at the preliminary exam in August.
Yes.
And after that testimony, did you make any efforts to determine whether there might be any other recent records, medical records from Zion Foster in existence other than the Henry Ford records that you've already discussed at length?
There was only one record from Henry Ford.
Okay, and did you check with anyone to determine whether there could be any other recent providers that may have provided care to Zion?
Correct. Yes, Sierra Milton, her mother.
And based on your discussions with Ms. Milton, were you able to identify any other possible recent providers of medical care to Zion?
No, only Henry Ford.
There was some discussion about a follow-up meeting involving Vertez Gonzalez
Yes.
at some point. And who was present at that particular meeting?
Myself, you, Vertez Gonzalez, and his attorney.
And what was the purpose of that particular meeting?
To clear up the statement that he made at the exam about a seizure.
Okay, and as part of, let me ask, in terms of your general experience, have you participated in other, I guess, meetings with prosecutors and witnesses before trial?
Yes.
Are those meetings typically recorded in some way?
No.
Okay. But if you're just interviewing a witness directly as part of an investigation, is that recorded usually?
Yes.
Okay. And in terms of the meeting that took place with Mr. Gonzalez, was there any other information that came to light in that meeting that we haven't already heard in open court?
No.
And in terms of the discussion with Mr. Gonzalez in that meeting, other than his description that he essentially saw, that you heard him testify to in open court about essentially seeing Zion pass out for a second or two, did he have any other relevant information about seizures?
No.
Okay. There are also some questions about Alima. Who is Alima when it comes to this investigation?
Alima was one of Zion's friends.
Okay, and was she interviewed during the investigation?
Yes, she was.
Okay. Do you know how old Alima is?
Approximately the same age as Zion.
Okay. There were some questions about alleged threats to certain people. When it comes to Katrina Smith, did you personally become aware of any sort of, let's say, actionable information about her being threatened?
No.
What sort of information did you have about threats when it came to her?
I just remember hearing that, people had had known about what happened from the case and were making comments on, I'm guessing social media, making comments about how they would get to her.
Okay, were you aware of any specific people?
No,
Were you aware of any specific comments?
no,
Were you aware of any specific threats that were made to her?
no,
Are you aware of whether she ever made a police report about these supposed threats?
not that I'm aware of.
If such a report had been made, what would be the process for investigating a threat? Would that be something that homicide would do?
No.
Who would handle a report about threats of that nature if it were made in Detroit?
So each precinct has a precinct detective unit. So for crimes that are not quote unquote major crimes, they're handled by the precinct in which either it's reported or the incident happened. So a precinct detective unit would handle that.
And again, are you aware of any type of report made by Katrina Smith relating to threats?
No.
How about for Angela Milton? Did you ever become aware of any actionable information about Angela Milton being threatened?
No.
Were you ever aware of anything specific about any supposed threats that were directed at her?
No.
What sort of information did you have, if anything, about threats when it came to her?
Like I said, I don't remember the interview exactly, specifically for Angela Milton.
Okay, and her interview, she was one of approximately how many people interviewed in connection with this case?
Countless.
Okay, and was there anything special or material gained from her interview that you know of?
No.
Okay, so she's not would you say like a material witness in this case?
No.
Again, are you aware of Angela Milton making any sort of police report about supposed threats?
No.
There was some question about the timing of when the defendant was ultimately charged with murder, and just to remind us, when was the murder charges, the charges that he's on trial for, when were those charges filed?
I believe it was June 12th, 2023.
Okay, and his last formal statement that he made up until that point was when?
I believe it was June 10th, 2022.
Okay, and so what was the reason for waiting to have him charged with homicide during that time?
So the landfill search hadn't concluded. During the end of the landfill search, a witness had come forward that wanted to offer information. So again, the investigation continued. So between interviewing the witness, conducting other search warrants, waiting for the returns on that, that's why.
Okay, and so it sounds like there were other leads that were being chased down at that time?
Yes.
And at some point, you were part of the effort to get charges authorized, correct?
Yes.
And what's your role in that process when it comes to getting charges authorized?
I submit a final, we call it investigator's report, and we submit it to the prosecutor's office, determine if charges are going to be issued or not.
Okay, and then charges were issued, you said, in June of 2023, correct?
Yes.
Okay,
Thank you. I have nothing further.
Now, Detective, you just testified that you were aware that comments were being made to Katrina Smith on social media in the way of threats, correct?
I remember, and I say comments, I'm not sure if, and that's how I see it, as like it would be social media, because the word comment is usually a direct.
Okay, but that was your testimony that you
Remember some comments being made to Katrina Smith, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and you never researched these comments or checked about these comments, did you?
No.
Okay. Now, as far as if a police report was generated, you wouldn't know because you never checked, correct?
I have searched Katrina Smith's name, and there was no threats report made.
When did you check her name?
Several times throughout the investigation, as well as I searched his name as well.
Did you check his mother's name through the search?
I don't recall.
Okay. So if there was a police report that was generated by her mother, by his mother, you wouldn't know if it exists or not, correct?
Yeah, correct. I'm not aware of a threats report.
Now, you stated that there was no actionable, I guess, evidence to support this. The reason why it wasn't actionable because you didn't dig deeper and do additional research to substantiate these threats, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And had you did additional research, you might have found something that was actionable, correct?
Objection calls for speculation.
Had you did deeper investigation, it's possible that you could have had some information that was actionable, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, you indicated that, I guess, items of, I guess, lesser importance are done at the precincts. I'm just paraphrasing. I don't want to take the words out of context, but that was the general idea that you were relaying to us, correct?
Well, if you're referring to major crimes, that was what I stated.
Okay.
Major crimes is a separate entity from the precinct. So major crimes consists of homicide, domestic violence, sex crimes, and child abuse. So it's not my definition.
But as an officer in charge, if you get some information that a potential witness' life is being threatened behind a case, is that significant to you?
Yes, it would be.
Okay. And you're familiar with the charge of witness intimidating, bribing, or tampering with?
Yes.
Okay. And that could be applicable in this case, correct? Correct? Could have been.
Comments made on the internet?
If somebody's being threatened and they're scared to come and testify, that could be witness intimidation, correct?
Sure.
Okay. And if something happened to that individual where they became missing and somebody actually acted upon these threats, that could be information you would want to know on who was previously making these threats, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. No further questions.
Any jury?
No, Your Honor.
Any questions from the jury? Please write your question down and pass it to the deputy. Counsel, please go. We're outside the presence of the jury.
Yes, I'll do my motion to do the board there. I would motion for a directed verdict. The court is to see and take the evidence and most favorable in the light of the prosecution. However, I don't believe that the rational or reasonable jury would find Mr. Brazier guilty of the crime of homicide. We've heard testimony from numerous individuals, one being from Cortez County Veterans, who indicated that he was aware that Ms. Foster had a history of seizures. He personally witnessed one of them. He indicated that she told him that she had previous seizures and that she was taking medication for those particular seizures. We then heard information from the doctor who was a medical examiner who did indicate from her experience and her knowledge that an individual could in fact die of a seizure with little to none showing from the individual as far as if they're observing from the outside. She also indicated that this could happen in a matter of seconds from the time of the individual walking out of the room back into the room. So for saying all of that, without going too much more into it, Your Honor, we just asked for a directed verdict because we don't believe the prosecutors can meet their burden on that. Great.
Your Honor, just briefly, it's the people's position that the circumstantial evidence in this case does support a finding of guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, and in particular, we have evidence concerning a relationship between Mr. Brazier and Ms. Foster that, by all appearances, bordered on inappropriateness given the communications that we had between the two of them. We have evidence that on January 4th, he brought her to his house late at night alone behind back of his girlfriend. And we know that she left his house in the trunk of his car and that he ultimately put her body in a dumpster and then did everything he could to manipulate, to lie, to obstruct the investigation. And so to now say that he threw her away because of a seizure, which was never even one of the supposed explanations that he gave to the multiple inconsistent statements he gave to the police, it's not supported, but it's an argument I think that he can make to the jury. He's entitled to make it to the jury, and this is a case that needs to be ultimately in the hands of the jury.
All right, certainly we've had Mike heard two witnesses who testified so far. The court reviews motions for directed verdict on the light most favorable to the non-moving party, which in this case obviously is the people. Certainly there's been testimony that Mr. Brazier picked up Ms. Foster from Ms. Foster's home in East Point on January 4th, brought her to his home, that they consumed marijuana, although that changed a couple of times. Evidence indicates that he believes that she first OD'd on marijuana, then on LSD, then no, it was marijuana, that he quote-unquote freaked out, and then put her body in the back of his vehicle. And there's certainly evidence on the night in question that he backed up his white Acura, presumably to disguise, not make it obvious that he's putting a body in the trunk, put a body, presumably based on the evidence, into the trunk, traveled to Highland Park, put that body in a dumpster, and then apparently made up a story, if you believe the prosecutor's version of events, that he received a scratch near the base of his throat from his cat. I think the jury could conclude that, based upon all of that evidence, that perhaps while there could be some sort of strange medical event that resulted in the death of Ms. Foster, it's also conceivable that the jury could view the evidence that there was some nefarious conduct that he in fact contributed to that caused Ms. Foster's death and then attempted to cover it up. We also had the testimony of Dr. Lee Lavity, who I think disputes the theory made by the defense that this was some sort of seizure or undiagnosed medical event that resulted in Ms. Foster's death. And that evidence, if believed, I think could also convince the jury that Mr. Brazier caused Ms. Foster's death. So for those reasons, motion for directed verdict into that. Do you intend to call any witnesses, Mr.
No.
Brown? All right, Mr. Brazier, please stand and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
All right. Sir, I'm going to ask you a series of questions. If at some point you can't hear, you don't understand something I say, please interrupt and let me know. And then I'll stop and go again and make sure that you do hear and you do understand, okay?
Yes.
And if I ask you a question, you give me an answer, I'm assuming that you understood the question, and the answer that you gave is the answer you intended to give. Fair enough?
Yes.
Okay. You understand you have the right to testify in this case and tell your version of the facts?
Yes.
And you understand if you want to testify, and you do testify, that Mr. Elsey has the right to cross-examine you?
Yes.
You understand you also have the right not to testify in this case. You decide not to testify in this case. I'm going to instruct the jury that they cannot hold that silence against you in reaching a verdict.
Yes.
All right, and have you had a chance to speak to your attorney, Mr. Brown, about your right to testify and your right not to testify?
Yes, sir.
And I don't want to know what you talked about, but did you speak about the risks of versus the benefits of testifying versus not testifying?
Yes.
Did he answer all of your questions as it relates to the decision to testify versus not testify?
Yes, sir.
All right, and is it your decision to testify or not testify in this case?
No, that's okay.
And is that decision based upon an adequate opportunity to speak with your attorney, Mr. Brown?
Yes.
Has anyone threatened you, coerced you in any way, forced you not to testify?
No, sir.
Has anyone promised you anything so you don't testify?
Not at all.
All right, any other questions, Mr. Brown?
No, I think that covers it.
And we're ready to proceed with closing arguments?
Yes.
Judge, I don't think that realistically I'm going to be able to finish today with his closing and rebuttal. Just given the less than an hour and a half left at this point. There were a lot of witnesses. My initial argument runs in about an hour and 5 minutes.
All right.
So I guess I'm wondering if we can just come back tomorrow and close. Or perhaps, and so we don't lose all the time, I don't know if the court would consider giving the instructions today instead of after closing arguments.
I think instructions are probably better given after closing arguments.
Understood.
So you're at about an hour. How long are you, Mr. Brown?
Nowhere near that, maybe 25 minutes, 25 minutes.
So that would put us at 4 o'clock.